swamp, legendary home of mystery, monsters, and shadowy creatures that lurk in the mist. Few get to see the interior of a real swamp. Few get to know a swamp as a place of primitive beauty, as a home for thousands of plants and animals. Yet tucked away deep within Florida's interior is such a natural setting, unhurried, virtually unchanged by man. It is the same as when Indians traded on this spot in centuries past. Today, this watery haven is known as the Barley Barber Swamp. Named for one of the first homesteaders of the area, the Barley Barber Swamp displays a profusion of wildflowers and hosts the playful antics of animals. Life here has evolved over thousands of years. Waters rise and fall with the seasons. Birds arrive to find sanctuary and food during cold northern winters. Food cycles begin and end here. An almost endless diversity of plants and animals coexist. Endangered species survive. The four seasons, so distinctly marked in northern climates, are less noticeable here. In South Florida, two clearly defined periods, a rainy season and a dry season, are determined by rainfall, temperature, and the hours of daylight. This cypress tree displays greenery in the warm months or rainy season, and then is barren during the cooler, dry season. Many other seasonal changes familiar to Floridians are more subtle and often go unnoticed by visitors. The seasonal changes affect the water cycles, causing a dramatic impact on life. A contrast of flood, then drought, can cause a 2-foot variation in the water level. During the dry season, a dark line on the trees marks the summer high water level. Water and sunlight form the base of the food chain. Countless microscopic plants and animals feed the millions of tiny fish and insects, which in turn provide for the larger species. This endless food chain results in a continuous balance of nature. The Barley Barber is a 400-acre swamp just east of Lake Okeechobee. It was preserved next to the cooling pond of Florida Power and Light Company's Martin plant. The utility is the steward for these wetlands. The natural margin of pinelands and wet prairie marks the transition to the swamp. Inside, giant cypress trees form a majestic centerpiece. The dark canopy created by the wetland forest filters the sunlight. Some trees are embraced by the strangler fig, which encircles the cypress with its tentacle-like roots, but takes no food or water from its host. Cypress can resist the stranglehold, but less hardy trees may perish. This cypress in the center of the swamp is believed to have lived more than 800 years ago. The low branches indicate it may have been one of the first trees in the area. Hundreds of flowering plants and dozens of ferns have adapted to the constant cycles of wet and dry. Plants here have curious names. The rouge plant, or bloodberry. The primrose willow. pickerel weed. The duck potato, its roots once eaten by the Indians. And the exquisite blue flag iris. Only specialized species survive in the moist shade created by the cypress canopy. Life has adapted to the rise and fall of the water and the seasonal changes of day length and temperature. Often unseen, an enormous diversity of animal life flourishes. A closer look is needed to discover the animals in their habitat. The ability to blend with their surroundings helps many species protect themselves and gather food. Insects like the bark mantis, the looper moth, and the wolf spider are barely discernible against tree bark. The common lizard, or Carolina anole, can change to the color of its background to hunt and hide from predators, while the assassin bug seeks victims in the twigs and branches. The food chain begins with the smallest creatures and ends with scavengers like this raccoon and predators like this gray fox. This bobcat roams through the swamp feeding on smaller animals such as rabbits and quail. The barley barber has dozens of butterfly species. Here we see the delicate beauty of the white peacock and the checker spot. Colorful caterpillars undergo metamorphosis into elegant butterflies like this zebra. Amidst this abundance of life are the birds, remarkable in their diversity and magnificence. Hundreds of bird species make the swamp and the surrounding wetlands home. At the turn of the century, egret populations were depleted by hunters. Due to the demand for plumes and clothing styles of the day, several species were near extinction. Today, the egret and other birds have recovered, due in part to the asylum offered by sanctuaries like the barley barber. After diving for food, an anhinga, or snakebird, dries its wings in the heat of the day. The red-bellied woodpecker offers a characteristic tapping to the sounds of the swamp. In addition, grackles, meadowlarks, and red-shouldered hawks spend their lives in a constant search for food. Of all the birds seen in the swamp, the most spectacular is the bald eagle. At dusk, this eagle flies over the cooling pond fishing for his evening meal. Except for Alaska, Florida has the highest number of bald eagles in the United States. This pair has a nest deep in the swamp in one of the tallest cypress trees. The prehistoric-looking wood stork roosts in the trees of the swamp. Due to the drainage and loss of Florida's wetlands, this bird is close to extinction. During May afternoons, ominous clouds move in from the west. breeze picks up and the temperature drops, signaling the approach of a life-giving rainstorm. During the wet season, rainstorms arrive almost every afternoon. Over 60% of the annual rainfall occurs between May and September. Creatures that were confined to the ponds and narrow waterways now swim over a wider area. With a wet season comes longer days. 14 hours of daylight and higher temperatures and humidity. The foliage becomes lush, insects flourish, and food is plentiful. This frog serves itself from its own cafeteria line. Overhead, the canopy of cypress needles becomes thick with new growth and filters the light. The fresh smell of moist vegetation fills the air. The increasing humidity brings the resurrection fern from a dormant stage. Stretching and twisting its soft leaves, it becomes resurrected from its death-like appearance within hours after a rain. The swamp fern and marsh fern cover the ground with a blanket of feathery green. The primitive whisk fern is believed to be the ancestor of all present-day ferns. The shoestring fern is found on Florida's state tree, the cabbage palm. You'll see the familiar Boston fern. And these unusual floating ferns, which are found in the pools of the swamp. The enormous leather fern may grow to 10 feet in height. The suede-like texture it develops, which gives the leather fern its name, is actually thousands of tiny reproductive spores. The spores on this strap fern are more distinct. Poison ivy also flourishes during the rainy season. Oil in the leaves, stems, and roots causes an allergic reaction in many people. The rainy season brings a bounty of color to the swamp. The names of the bright blossoms are as colorful as the flowers. The canna lily, the button bush, lizard's tail, the meadow beauty, and the marsh pink. A half-dozen different members of the orchid family can be seen. The Harrisella orchid is so tiny, it has no leaves. Photosynthesis takes place in its thread-like roots. Some orchids are terrestrial, such as this wild cocoa, which may stand 3 feet tall. Others, like the showy butterfly orchid, grow attached to trees. It is this blaze of color that attracts pollinating insects such as the butterfly and the honeybee. The swallowtail flutters over a pickerel weed. A skipper feeds on an iris. Another skipper alights on a blazing star. A buckeye feeds on a goldenrod. A queen butterfly probes a button bush. All demonstrate the delicate interaction between plants and animals. freshwater turtle breaks the surface and swims to shore. Usually found in the water, turtles lay their eggs in the nearby sand during the beginning of the wet season in May and June. This soft-shelled turtle came ashore to lay a clutch of eggs before returning to the water. The eggs incubate in the warm sand for 9 weeks before the hatchlings emerge. Of the dozen kinds of snakes seen in Barley Barber, nearly all are non-poisonous. A commonly seen species is this harmless and beneficial rat snake, named for its food preference. The coloration of this keeled green snake provides camouflage as it hunts in the vegetation. The indigo snake is protected as a threatened species. Rarely seen, indigos hunt throughout the swamp in search of small animals such as rats and mice. Indigos also eat other snakes, including rattlesnakes. Above the water level, the eggs of the apple snail incubate in the warm air. The adult snails are a critical food source for a number of birds, including the endangered snail kite and this limpkin. During the warmer, wet months, many migratory birds have returned north, leaving the swamp to the year-round and summer residents, such as this nighthawk. In the uplands adjacent to the swamp, meadowlarks, quail, cardinals, and blue jays can be found. Within the swamp, the barred owl and the red-shouldered hawk are often seen and heard. These predators seek the same food, but the owl usually hunts at night and the hawk during the day. Inhabitants of the swamp during the rainy season are those that have survived and evolved through countless cycles. Not only have they adapted for existence during the wet season, but they are also suited to face what the next 5 months of drier, cooler weather will bring. As the cool, dry season approaches, the days grow shorter. The sun rides lower in the southern sky, temperatures begin to drop, and the rains taper off. By November, the once dark green cypress canopy loses its color. Branches and leaves turn dry and brittle, and the needles begin to fall. Beneath the canopy, light streams through and helps to evaporate the watery floor. As the waters recede, fish populations become concentrated. The remaining pools become centers of activity as the aquatic life struggles to survive. A cold January morning brings a dramatic sunrise, and later, wispy winter clouds. Thousands of birds like these swallows migrate from the north to find food and avoid freezing temperatures. The yellow-bellied sapsucker and these white pelicans, which migrate from the northwest, also stay in Florida only in the dry season. For many bird species, the Barley Barber is an important refuge during their migration. Even in the dry season, the swamp remains active. Cold-blooded creatures become more visible as they bask in the sun's warmth. Bromeliads, or air plants, are among the most abundant of all the plants in the swamp. In the dry season, when the foliage is greatly reduced, these plants become more noticeable. Air plants attach themselves to the trees, but do not depend on the host tree for nutrients. Water trapped at the base of their leaves helps decompose fallen vegetation and insects. This nutrient-rich organic soup feeds many smaller creatures. A striking member of the bromeliad family is the cardinal air plant. This familiar sight draping from trees is Spanish moss, another member of the bromeliad family. In the dry season, many plants are dormant, but some, such as the saltbush, flower and seed. The dahun holly and the pineland heliotrope offer a colorful contrast to the dry season background. The swamp's location makes it a unique home for both temperate and tropical species. An occasional frost, such as this, limits tropical vegetation. After 5 months, the dry season is nearing an end, and the plant and animal population has dwindled. Only the strongest of each species survives. What was a tragedy for the thousands that perished is actually nature's way of keeping a strong, balanced population. Of all the conifers or pine trees, only the cypress sheds its needles. This seasonal shedding during the dry months earned it the name bald cypress. The changing colors of this lone bald cypress tree during March, July, October, and January bear testimony to the passing seasons. Although many cypress swamps were cleared by lumbermen, the inaccessibility of the barley barber made timber cutting impractical. Today, this swamp is carefully protected and managed through scientific techniques. It remains one of the few places where the Florida of 100 years ago can be seen. An important part of life in most South Florida habitats is the natural phenomenon of fire. Lightning strikes the dry tinder, burning all but those which are naturally fire-resistant. This occasional burning reduces the accumulation of underbrush and prevents the threat of a totally devastating wildfire. The remaining ash contains nutrients, which stimulates the regrowth of the fire-tolerant plants. Surrounding the barley barber, the slash pine and palmetto survive and recover in several months. To maintain this ecosystem, land managers sometimes initiate fires to simulate nature. Human activity in the surrounding area has altered natural water levels. Careful management attempts to duplicate the levels of the natural cycles. Cypress trees thrive when their root systems are underwater most of the year. These cypress knees, seen throughout the swamp, are thought to act as snorkels, providing air to the cypress roots. Control of water levels helps assure a healthy cypress community. Plants not native to the area, called exotics, are controlled. Introduced over the last century, plants like the climbing vine fern often overpower the delicate balance of native species. The Brazilian pepper, another exotic, is removed to allow native species a better chance for survival. Longer daylight hours and an increase in temperature signal the return of the wet season. The endless cycle of depletion, then abundance, continues. The cypress turn light green, then a darker shade, casting a canopy once again over the swamp's interior. Like a traditional spring, blossoms appear. Buds and seedlings emerge. Needles sprout, and the swamp becomes abuzz with new growth and activity. Bright, warm, sunny mornings give way to afternoon thunder showers, and the life-giving rains again replenish the swamp. Over and over, year after year, this cycle of seasons in the swamp repeats according to nature's own timetable. No one knows for sure how long the Barley Barber Swamp has been here, or what particular environmental factors brought about its existence. How many treacherous hurricanes it has weathered. How many killing frosts it has endured. Or how many more secrets hide in the moist shadows. We only know it is a tiny remaining gem of a natural Florida that is preserved for all to see.